As a leading player in the evolution of the Nigerian state over the last 50 years, he is someone who can rightly and fittingly be described as someone who has seen it all. Our guest on the program today has occupied leadership positions at various governmental levels, at the corporate level, in public affairs management, as well as grassroots mobilization and leadership. Ambassador Farounbi, thanks for joining us on the program.
It's nice being here.
Thank you. We've heard so much about how Africa's #1 problem is leadership deficit. But everyone seems to be focusing only on how leaders are not getting it right across various spectrum or spheres of life. Nobody seems to be looking at one aspect, the constraints of leadership. As someone who has occupied leadership position and has interfaced with leaders at various levels, can you please share with us, if you can, what are the constraints you've observed over the decades that leaders have had to contend with on the African continent, particularly in Nigeria?
Somebody once said, a society deserves the leadership it gets, because the leadership itself is a product of that society. And that is why when you look at successive leadership in Nigeria or in African continent, in fact, the greatest problem they have has been the followership.
The followership.
First of all, you need a followership that is articulate, patient, resourceful, critical, questioning, asking. But when you have a followership that thinks only by itself, self-considered, is local, partisan, ethno or religious interest, then it poses a problem for the leadership.
So to summarize what you just said, the attitude and the manner in which the followership interface with the leadership determine the performance of the leader himself or herself.
Particularly what you call the top 5%.
Top 5% of the populace.
Of the populace. If they themselves are not articulate, if themselves cannot ask questions, if they cannot ask the right question, so even if they are being given wrong answers, they won't know. Yeah, we know the totality of the follower, they do not move in mass. Sociology teaches us that. It's the leading 5% that you really need to address. The bulk sometimes follow without knowing why they are following.
Why they are following.
They don't even know the direction you're going. So that is why the critical element in any society is the leader and that top 5.
The leader and the leading 5%.
5%. If the two of them have quality, they have resources, they are creative, they are innovative, then that society will move forward.
Wow. So that's a major constraint of leadership. The critical 5%. Either to what we tend to focus on in Nigeria is everybody's waiting until such a period when we'll have that kind of mass movement, as was the case in China when Chairman Mao and his team were moving from peasantry, from village to village, mobilizing peasants. And that seems to be what a lot of Nigerians are waiting for, that call, that clarion call, as it were, where a mass mobilization of people will queue behind ideals that will, progressive ideals, as it were. But you seem to be telling us now, and this is new for me, I must say, that what you need is, as your critical mass is not a majority, but that top 5% of the populace.
You know, that top 5, sometimes I call them dog handlers.
Oh dear.
But in our business, we call them gatekeepers.
Gatekeepers.
They open and close gates. They decide what the masses will accept. They moderate it. They manicure it. they pedicure it if necessary, and present it to the masses, and the masses will accept.
I agree.
There are critical elements in every society that the masses believe in, in any society, blindly. He says, I think we should follow Mr. X, and they agree. So is that critical mass that those who want to lead successfully must concentrate on. So if you want to change a society, that leader must identify that critical mass and interface with them. Market your vision to them, market your views to them. They are the gatekeepers. They are the dog handlers. They are the ones who present an otherwise difficult position to the people.
The focus up until now has always been on the leader. The society tends to focus on the leader rather than focusing on that critical top 5% who would be able to modify or even influence the actions and activities of the leadership.
It is a pity, but it is something we have to correct. I hear it. Oh, Mogalu lost. Kwesile was not supported. Peladuro, someone was there. Gani Femi was there. Yes, they were good people.
Yes.
But the people would deliver the masses to them. And the people would deliver their vision to the masses. That critical mass. These visionary leaders did not consult them, did not carry them along. These 5%, they control the reality. They are the leader.
Could one extrapolate from this submission that perhaps has been the missing gap up until now? People keep bemoaning that the nation needs good leaders, persons of strong pedigree, people of positive antecedents. Yet when such people come onto the political scene, they tend to be rubbished at the election.
Because they themselves are not identified that there are people who make the masses available to them on election day.
So a visionary potential public office holder who has a mindset of transformational leadership needs to begin with this critical top 5%. Because what we have seen happen over time is they just move directly from their own position to the masses, the mass of the people. And that nexus has not worked.
You see, they move directly to the mass of the people who sometimes don't understand what they are saying. I still remember that in one of the campaigns of Chief Awolowo, somebody asked him, you talk about free education, how are you going to fund it? And he asked for a blackboard at the rally. And he was calculating where we get money. And I was just laughing. These people are not interested in that. They've gone to a rally, as far as they're concerned, something like a masquerade festival. They wear a t-shirt, they carve, they run around, they enjoy themselves, they dance, they carry the flag. Half of the time what you are saying, they have not listened to, because they know somebody is going to moderate when they get home. It's going to say, this is the direction we are going. So when you miss that as the would-be visionary leader, then you will always be the best that never was.
As you were talking now, I began to go back into my mental archives of societal evolution in different countries where they've been able to successfully transit from peasantry into modernity. And I saw that there were oases of opinion molders who keyed into the agenda of that transitional movement. And we don't seem to have that around here. Many of the people who, by virtue of their socio-economic clout, can be regarded as members of that top 5%, tend to think only about myself. Once they attain that level, They tend to just think about me and my family rather than committing to societal evolutionary growth. Could we say that is why Nigeria is still the way it is?
Part of it, and it's very unfortunate, because when you get there and you think of yourself and you forget the remaining 95%, then you must also recall what one great leader once said, because the poor are not sleeping, the rich cannot. Because they can wake up and begin to attack.
When they have nothing to eat.
When they have nothing to eat, or nowhere to sleep, or nothing to drink, or nothing to wear.
But how come over the decades, since the 50s, 40s, the early generation of elites didn't seem to imbibe this mentality, as opposed to what we have in other society, other countries of the world, where the elites, this is the mentality they practice. It's all about the society, because they recognize that their individual interest, wellness, well-being resides in the society rather than in themselves. What do you think is responsible for the first generation of elites? Because that's what has been passed down over the decades.
Exactly.
Succeeding elites over the decades came to imbibe the first generation since the 40s.
It is sad because that first generation became white men in black color.
Sure.
They took over the role of the white men. They were only white, black in color. They were living in Okedio, far away from the people. The white man who came all the way from England as a colonial district officer, it's okay if he lives on his hilltop, afraid of mosquito bites and not wanting to relate to the common black person. Then you become a Dio and you're a black man and you still want to live at the hilltop. To behave like that foreigner, that was the tragedy.
And that's where we got it wrong, I want to believe.
That was where we missed it. So the very first generation operated like the white imperialists who had no relationship to the common people, who cannot identify with their poverty, their hunger, their aspiration and their hopes. They were different. They were distant from them. And that was where we got it wrong. We didn't behave, for example, like the generation that took over from the British in India.
Before today, I'd always thought the leaders are the ones that need to drive the society and move it forward. But no one single individual could deliver that, as I've consciously realized now. And as you were speaking also, I was searching my head whether I could get examples of places I could use to counter your proposition that the peasantries do not deliver good societies. And I couldn't find any, because I've tried to study societies across the world, and I realized that peasants don't deliver the society. It's usually a group of intelligentsia who will be in this top 5 that will mobilize the peasantries to do the job. So, and from that, I extrapolated that what the society, Nigerian society needs right now is to begin to focus attention away from the leaders as much as possible.
But on that 5.
And focus it on that critical 5%, top 5%.
Because if that top 5% can synergize with the visionary individuals that we see, and they can work together, we're going to deliver a better society. When you talk about that first generation that took over,
yes.
If you look into the traditional African society, we were dictators.
Yes.
The Obas were dictators. The Emas were dictators. It was only in the East they didn't have Obas.
It was more Republican.
They were more Republican. They were dictators. So the pattern of behavior of the white suited them.
Coming up.
If we want to create a better society, which we all talk about, we must not be looking for one man. we love power. We love the arrogance, the pomp, the pageantry associated with the power. I remember the Arema who was passing through Oyo villages, and he said he was getting that. He said, set all those horses ablaze so that I can see. It didn't matter to him that people will have no place to sleep. So we have traits that were dictatorial. Although in the traditional society we had our
checks and balances.
Checks and balances. In the British system, they had their checks and balances, but we were more fascinated by the pomp. We didn't take the check. Like we brought in the presidential system, Montesquieu creation, separation of power between executive, legislative, and judiciary, and they are to be counterbalancing. And between the federative unit and the center, they are also to be counterbalancing. We lost all those checks. We are more interested in the pomp of being a senator, the pomp of being a governor, and the pomp of being a president.
So we perverted that structure.
So we perverted the imported culture. So it is critical for us, if we want to create a better society, which we all talk about, we must not be looking for one man that will do it. We must be looking for oasis. That's a proper word. That can be networked by this one man. So,
in a sense, the likes of Mogalu, who is one of our best stories of late in terms of cerebral capacity, visionary thinking, and also in terms of capacity in public affairs management, not being able to cross that bridge from lack of patronage by voters to huge patronage by voters. We seem to be realizing now that it's because they failed to connect those oases, those networks.
They must identify those oases. It might take time. We must identify them and network them. They're the ones who say in the villages, we've always been putting in party LE. We are going to vote AD this time.
The oases that you talked about, which is also like the top 5% that we've been harping upon, can we have a list of them by way of public education, for instance?
You know, when you go around Nigeria, as I do,
we talk about captains of industries, the elites in the education sector.
They're there.
Are these people we're talking about?
Professions, in education, in business, in academia, they're there. Sometimes frightened, sometimes disillusioned, sometimes lost and forgotten, but they're there.
I agree.
And they can influence their society.
Couldn't there be a constraint, because we're still looking at constraints of leadership, couldn't there be a constraint by way of, over the decades, the first generation of elites, who are these top 5%, imbibed the oppressors' pomps and pageantry and the power lust, as well as this superiority, which has been transferred over time. Can it not be a constraint that the present generation of elites have also imbibed, because it seems to be in our DNA, and they may not be able to muster the high level of moral consciousness that is required to drive that type of political consciousness?
You are right. And in this, I'm going to make a reference. There was one speech that Obasanjo made when he was head of state, military, at Jaji, and he said, for this country to move forward, there has to be a sharp break.
Sharp break.
You see, you cannot continue with what we have in progressive, revolutionary matter and hope that it will get better. You only need to sit down. You see, it's going to get worse. After every election, the successor is more likely to be worse than his predecessor. And this is because you cannot be doing the same thing the same way over and over
Get a different
and
result.
expect different results. So we have to have almost a revolutionary way of looking at things.
So it has to be a mental shift first.
That is a critical thing. And it may take time.
Because the top 5%, because I want to dwell a lot on it before we move to other things as much as we can. That top 5%, which I'm agreeing with you now, I haven't searched my archival memory about how societies move from peasantry to modernity. Those top 5% that have delivered over other societies, they seem to have a very, very wrong value orientation, a very, very wrong mindset projectional.
Yes.
And if the brain box is that defective, I'm not sure if it can take the vehicle to the destination that we anticipate. So
It is not likely.
it is not likely.
And hardware engineer will tell you it's difficult to repair brain box. You replace it.
You replace the brain box.
But because we are human beings, what we need to do is to embark on a mass public enlightenment education so that we can have a reorientation, a value reorientation, a value redefinition for these people.
Okay, for this top 5%.
Exactly.
The reality on ground is that these top 5 are all about themselves presently, largely. And even if you try to mobilize people to say, let's think society, that might just be the end of your career as a leader, because they will asphyxiate you, they will find a means to just get you somewhere. If they don't get you destroyed, they get you put on the sideline or the peripheral. How do we move forward as a society when we have a situation like this?
You know why I believe that we can't give up and that we must keep on educating?
I agree.
Difficult as it may look, there's something I call the force of inertia.
The force of inertia.
Yes. And I illustrated this. When you park a trailer with heavy luggage, the trailer driver will put it on handbrake, then he will put a shock so that it won't move. But if you ask a trailer driver, he will tell you that in spite of the shock and the handbrake, because of the enormous weight, that trailer will move forward. You cannot have 205 million people, over 300 ethnic units, 774 local government, 36 plus 1 states. And you think that whether you like it or not, change will not be created. It will be generated. But the danger is, if that change is not led, it could result in, rather than having a positive movement, you can end up in a mob hysteria. And that is why we must keep on. And that is why it is critical, the role of the media in this. They are a critical element, even within the 5%.
Yes.
Those who call them the fourth estate of the realm, they knew what they can do. Unfortunately, you might not see signs that that is being done here.
I was going to ask you, because besides being a top leader in governance, in politics, in political practice and discourse and theory, you've also been a major player in the media industry. You've been a general manager of at the NTA. You retired and you were a leading brain behind the creation of the first state television station in Nigeria. And it's supposed to be a public broadcaster. But these days, a lot of public broadcasters How would you assess their role and performance? I know they are hampered, but would you give it to them by way of the content they are dishing out in relation to this value reorientation, this mental re-engineering that we're talking about?
No. It says public service broadcasting had to be a public service.
Okay.
Public convenience, public interest. They have to ask themselves, and we can ask that question, are they serving public interest? Because government interest is not necessarily public interest.
It's not.
And that is because the concept of ownership of public broadcasting in this country is wrong.